Alright, I'm Kev, that's Willyrags. And, I mean, you guys know pretty much, we won't have to go over history and stuff of us, do we, or anything like that? Yeah, okay.
Kevin's drum Jesus. He walks on water and turns it into wine. He catches red drum.
And I do occasionally go after striper. Yeah, that's my person. Yeah, somebody, I thought he only goes after reds. I'm like, yeah, I do, but occasionally I catch one. Yeah.
So, a little bit different. Basically, talk about how we go out there. Kind of similar type of areas that we target and what we target them with. With the fly, it's not rocket science. It's using those same techniques that Kev is going to use conventionally, just I'm using a different piece of equipment to go catch those same fish. They still act the same, they still feed the same, but at times I have an advantage over him, at times he has an advantage over me.
Yeah, I mean, stripers are predators, you know, I mean, we even look at the way, if you really want to look at a fish and really want to start targeting the fish, kind of break down him physically, you know, look at him. Their eyes kind of up top, on the sides, right, kind of a little bit more forward so they can kind of see forward. Jaw structure is a big deal, especially when you're fishing for a fish, because where is he going to be targeting? Striper's jaws are lower bottom jaws, so that means mid and top water column. They're going to come up on stuff. They're going to see stuff and come up on them. Red drum, opposite. Long nose, bottom jaw, diggers, right? Rooters with their nose, they're going to dig stuff up and they're going to dig in. So bottom when you're fishing for reds. But so stripers, you can fish top water, you know, and you can fish on the bottom too, but still they're going to be looking up more towards stuff than the predators. Ambush predators, attacking predators, they're all around predators on that. And really simple kind of presentations on them. Got a little bit of variance, but basically matching the hatch. I mean, both of us are going to go kind of show matching the hatch. I think kind of a cool way to do this is,
You want to talk about the gear we use and kind
we'll start doing on the gear. We'll do the gear first, and then maybe even going like, okay, type of structure, and then where, like a place where you would fish, and then kind of maybe give an idea of what we would do, type of thing on that. So, yeah, you gonna do fly fishing?
Yeah. So
on the gear stuff.
I have this stuff here for you. If you didn't get one, I think I have a couple left. I can hand these out if you see me afterwards. This is just resources for those of you that want to get into fly fishing. I'm not really going to go and beat this to death. The rods I use for striper are anything from really a 6 to 9 weight. And the weight of a fly rod, it is what determines the size of the fly you're going to throw. So I'm not going to try and throw a little 2-inch fly that weighs just the weight of a small hook and a single feather on a 9 weight. It's not designed for that. The weight of the line helps you propel that fly. So basically what I'm looking at is a rod that's going to help load. The rod does all the work when it comes to the casting. So you do your back cast, the line goes back, it loads the rod. Once you feel it load, you do your forward cast, it goes out. 6 to 8, our 6 to 9 is really the ideal size for the flies we want to throw to try and get striper.
Looks good.
And I'll talk about that once we kind of start going into presentations and stuff as far as what I'll throw. Another thing with the rods is you can get 6 and 7 weights without a fighting butt. So right here, I've caught stripers and redfish on 5 weights, and it's a blast, you know. It's like taking an ultralight rod out for a largemouth bass. It's fun, you enjoy it. But when you're trying to fight that fish, that fighting butt gives you a leverage point. And without that fighting butt, you're not able to get the rod in. It's not able to take line out on drag. That reel is sitting there, and when it's sitting there, it's more area for that to get caught up on, and you lose drag. Also, without a fighting butt, you really feel your fatigue in your forearms and in your wrists. I don't care how strong you are, but I, right here, just have a little bit of contact with that fish. So it's working me. Without a fighting butt, I'll be switching my hands up with a rod and just really trying to get that leverage so I don't tire out. So my rod's 6 to 8. The reels, saltwater, it's looking for a reel that's going to balance the rod. With a rod like this, it's a lighter weight rod. I'm going to want a lighter weight reel. In weight as in ounces. Because it's going to balance it, I'm going to have less fatigue when I'm casting. You don't have to go out and get the lightest reel because that's not always going to work with the fly rod you're using. Final piece on the rod and reel is for stuff like striper. It's really one of the easiest saltwater fish to catch on the fly. You don't have to go out and spend $6, $7, $1,500 on a fly rod combo. Those fly rod combos that they sell for 60, 70 bucks at Bass Pro Shops honestly work just fine for what we're doing here.
Conventional side, we're targeting schoolies and that size of fish. We're talking keeper size. We're not talking big giants or anything like that. I like a rod that medium tackle, medium light, and I like a good backbone on it. So it's got a real fast tip and a fast backbone to it. See where on the fourth guide, fifth guide, it starts to bend out, and by the sixth one's really straightened out. That's what I like, and that's because you get a lighter rod, like a spec rod, what I call a spec rod, a real noodly rod. You have to set the hook harder on that, and specs you kind of go light, so you would do something like that. With this, you can kind of really set the hook on striper, and for the variety of presentations with a variety of lures, that type of action really works well because you can really go light with it. You can just crankbait type with it, or you can give real hard jerks to a bait. You can really live it up with a real fast action rod instead of a real noodly rod. As in line, 30 pound. I don't go under 30 pound. Even on my leader, I use 30 pound. I use braid. I don't like any of the stretch on that. But I do use leader, just mono for striper. Just 30 pound and above. I won't go under that. Reels, just you don't need a super powerful reel for these things either. This is kind of just your everyday kind of get up. And this rod is good. This is good for everything. I mean, you can go for reds, small reds, for flounder, anything inside the inlets that we target in our kayaks are medium action rod, up to 1 ounce, 3/4 to up to 1 ounce rod. I think this one is rated 1/4 to 1 ounce. Yeah, 10 to 20 pound, line class. So that's a real good rod for all around here, striper especially because of the type of lures that we're using and stuff. But it's really about that action, having that action and being able to work lures and give presentations. Because sometimes stripers just want straight line. Sometimes they want it crazy erratic. I find a lot of times, as you're casting one lure, you want to trade up a whole bunch of different presentations if you're not getting bites. But the only problem is remembering what you just did once you get a bite. That's when video comes in handy. You go back, oh, that's what I was doing. That's why I didn't catch another one the rest of the night because I didn't do that. But that's it. That's the type of gear I like for this stuff. As you go up to bigger fish, bigger striper, you just beef it up some more. When we're doing those eland stuff on Eastern Shore, it's musky rods, boat rods, heavier stuff like that. Just your basic big fish rods on that. But stripers aren't the best bruisers that we fight around here. Reds and cobia would be in that hardest bruiser, fighter type of fish. But stripers will put up a really good fight, so they're still fun nevertheless. They fight a lot differently, but you can go fairly light with striper and get away with pulling them in. Like Rob did the line class record of it.
Tried. I think he was using 4 pound.
4 pound test and caught a
36, 38 incher.
Oh no, 30 pounder. Right? It was a 44 incher. This is when
Oh,
when
yeah,
But it was a 30. He had to break 40 pounds or something, but it was a 36 pounder, something like that. But it was a 44 incher. But he fought it on like 4 pound test in 6 minutes, like our usual time. It wasn't even any longer than our regular time on a fight.
You get a couple good head shakes. You get like 2 if you're lucky, 3 good runs. Then it's just kind of like, okay, let me get my picture taken. I've had fun. In the winter and in the fall, as the water temps cool down, they're a colder water fish. So you get good solid fights that time of the year. In the spring, we can actually go and downgrade what we're using a little bit more because the water's warmer. As they're fighting, they're building up that lactic acid, and they just don't have it in them to give us what we get in the colder water. So it's two different fights at two different times of the year as well.
Yeah, yeah. But most of you guys probably caught small stripers before, right? I mean, and caught stripers compared to reds. You know, same size red, the same striper. It's a whole different thing. Yeah, the stripers have that kind of lobby at the end. They just kind of like blah 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 blah, and then they're done.
They taste better than reds too. So that's one reason.
And this area is great for striper. They've in the last 15 years that I've been targeting them here, they've changed where they've gone. They used to concentrate a lot at the bridges. HRBT used to be amazing at it, and now it's everybody thinks they're gone, but they've showed up in the creeks. They've expanded their range more than lost their numbers. And same thing with reds. When people think about Rudy or Lynnhaven, how come they're not reds there anymore? Because they're up in Maryland. Their range has gone into Maryland now, and that's over the years that's expanded. And same with these stripers. They're expanding out. The creeks are getting cleaner, so they're going in there following the baits. We used to be, we just HRBT any time of the year, all year long, and nowadays it's a little bit more seasonal. It's a little bit thinner, but they're better or more in the creek. So anywhere around here is a good spot for them. The whole bay is filled with them. Even if you go up the northern bay, you start going into a different technique. But let's start going.
And like down here, you catch big striper all the way up to the fall line in Richmond.
Yeah.
So they're even branching out into the more brackish areas. And that's one of the great things. We're doing a better job taking care of our waterways. And unfortunately for the striper fisherman that wants to go out after work in the fall or in the spring and hit them on the light lines, it's not benefiting them as much, but it's benefiting the whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, because the fish are definitely growing and the population is getting good and healthy.
You want to talk about baits?
Yeah, yeah. Or do you want to do that? Well, we can do that. Yeah, I was going to maybe ask specific places, but
oh, yeah, we can.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's say the bridges, right?
Okay.
If as a kayaker, HRBT is probably the first spot you're going to go. That's not inside an inlet. That you're going to go and really have your a place to fish. That's a little challenging. You got the currents, you got the pilings, you got the noise. So it's a little challenging. I mean, that's where I learned most of my skill at the beginning of my paddling career.
So in addition to being Drum Jesus, he's also the HRBT band.
That was my name at the beginning. But and that place is really great, especially at nighttime. But when you go there, it is chaotic, but it's a good place. And as a kayaker, you don't have to fish all the way out to the island. The bend right there by the shoreline has everything and everything you can catch right there. As a kayaker, that is our area. From that small boat channel lights to the shoreline is perfect. You can fish that on a 100-mile-an-hour south wind.
We've caught them. We've caught them in the fall in conditions that I'll tell you I shouldn't have been out in, but I only had to go to the second light.
Yeah.
And I mean, they are literally guys when you used to be able to go up there without hassle and surf cast from the shore at Willoughby. Mm-hmm. Guys with surf rods would go out there with 1-ounce spoons and slay them from shore.
Yeah.
So striper, the biggest thing with them is they are going to follow their food source. And if that bait can make it up there and that striper has enough water to swim and chase and attack that bait, that striper will go up there. That striper will go into 6 inches, 8 inches of water as long as they can get that bait. That's where they'll be. So you don't have to worry about it being too shallow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. But even at the bend right there, it's got deep channels that run through there. And HRBT is also really great with the structure, underwater structure there itself. You got shoals or sandbars that run parallel with the bridge almost all the way out. You got another one in the middle, and then spread out ones on the west side. So you have a lot of ups and downs all around that underwater structure. And all that is, as soon as you come off a drop off, that's a spot, right? That's where ambush predators are going to hang out, looking for things that come up and hit them.
You have the pilings.
Pilings.
So if you have a tide coming in, those striper are going to sit back in that eddy trying to ambush.
They hang out a little bit out of the current, in that little eddy, and wait for things to come by, and bam, hit them, come back in. So
if the tide's coming toward me, I'm going to fish the inside of those pilings. I generally start at what I feel would be the most productive, and that would be the one with the most current break at the back. Then I'll work my way up. And then tide starts going back out behind me. I just switch the side that I'm focusing on. You actually have this down, and what you've presented on this has been amazing. Light line fishing, because that's a skill that that not a lot of people have anymore, since we don't have that light line fishing.
Right, it used to be so amazing that I did a seminar here last year on the light line, and I did a video on it on YouTube. So I'll link to this one and put it up. But it's the actual bridge lights coming down onto the water, right? And the shadow of the bridge on the water, that is the light line. It's a vivid line on the water. And on the current, the stripers will hang out in the shadow of the bridge, and the baits come into the lights, and they use it as an ambush point. So basically it's a structure, it's a cover for them. You got the shadow, and as a kayaker, you can come up right behind them and cane pole them. I mean, you can get right up on them. Used to be the whole place, right? It used to be like somebody dumping bricks from a dump truck off of the bridge. Just used to blow up out there all the time. It's slowed down now. It's become more of a hunt, but they're still there. And it's fun to do. Great sight casting. It's all about sight casting. Great maneuvering, casting skills, all that stuff that comes into play with it. But it's exhilarating when you see them attack your lure and all that stuff.
And for me, on the light line with a fly rod, it could be as simple as me not even casting.
Yeah.
I'm sitting down here. Let's say this is a kayak. I'm off the bow, and those fish are right in that shadow. So Forrest's knee is that shadow. I can drift back or pull back and pull that bait right into that shadow where they're going to ambush. Another thing I can do is, let's say I'm back a bit further to where I can't cane pull it. I can let out a little bit more line. I can let out 10 foot of line, and now all I have to do is make a 10-foot cast. I don't have to make 30 different false casts. Like, have y'all seen a river runs through it? That is the exact opposite of what I'm doing. I just go and make my back cast. Here, if you hold on to that, Doogie. Make my back cast just to get a tiny bit of line out to load, and then I go forward, and that line goes right there. That my bait hits right there. And on stuff like that, I'm doing that when those striper are up at the top of the water column. Like Kevin said, with their structure, they're feeding a little bit down sometimes. If they see a bait, they'll chase it down, but they're feeding in eyesight and up. So all I want to do is I want to bring that bait right over that fish, just as long as that fish sees it. Thanks, dude.
Hey, I got mad skills.
Just as long as that fish sees it. That's all I'm really focused on. Another thing that I can do is if I'm out a little bit further, and sometimes when you get the higher tides, especially at a place like Willoughby side of the HRBT, the bridge is a bit lower. I can do what's called a roll cast. And basically I have enough line out in front of me, and all I'm doing is, instead of making my back cast to load the rod, I lift the rod up, my fly line's on the water, and once I get it up, I'm using that water, the resistance on the water with my fly line to load it. So I'm going back, and then I'm just bringing it back down. And all your fly and your fly line does is goes like this, and then it loops over itself. It rolls on itself. So that's where, really, when they're fishing up there, I have the complete advantage on Kevin. Kevin has to keep going like this. He has to keep casting, letting line out, bringing line back in. If I position myself I can have the same amount of line out the whole time and just keep rolling, just keep hitting those fish.
Because you can get more shots. Like when I paddle up to the light line and I see a fish, I get enough momentum that I don't cross the line, but I hover. So I get my momentum, I'm getting right into the current, and then I'm hovering there. So I got about 3 shots, reel back 3 shots before I'm out of range and getting the current pulled back. You can probably roll 5 or 6 before.
Well, and even something like that too, I can one-arm paddle, which is a different skill in and of itself, but I one-arm paddle. And again, to make my roll cast, I don't have to have this hand on the line. I can do everything with one hand, with one arm. So I got the paddle in my hand, I'm staying in position, and I can keep rolling that fly, or I can keep cane pulling that fly.
Yeah, and these are short casts. You know, you're not casting way out far. You're seeing the fish right here. All you're doing is putting it basically 3 or 4 feet in front of it to get the lure in front of its face. And sometimes they'll move, and then you got to make another one. So that's that roll. You pull it before it. And also in that open water where the light is, that's where the bluefish are. So you got to kind of like not put it too far out there, just put it right there. But I use dark lures, maybe a little bit of a spinny on it, but that's what I use on light line. Something dark because it needs silhouetted so they can see it. Use something real light or clear, where light comes through it, they're not going to see it as well. Even though they're chasing silver sides, which is about the right size, still want it dark so they can see it.
And talking about that bait, some nights, honestly, they might be chasing silver sides that big, and you could throw a frickin' brick out there and put treble hooks on the brick, and the striper will just tear it up. Some nights they don't care. Other nights, or sometimes even within the same tide cycle, there's something in their minds and they switch. And if you don't have that exact size, that exact profile of the bait that they're feeding on, you can watch them. Good luck. You can be out there without what you need and see someone else literally right next to you, bailing, literally, hook, 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 and you're just frustrated. So it's knowing what they're feeding on, knowing the size, and ensuring that when you go out, you at least have that. This time of year, this is when the silver sides start coming in. Another thing is in the fall and the winter, we have mantis shrimp coming in. So places like the bridges, we have a lot of shrimp in here on the bridges. So for a fly, I have flies up here. I'll have something like a deceiver or a clouser minnow if I want to go a little bit deeper to mimic my silver sides. I'll also have something like an ultra shrimp or any other shrimp pattern to mimic those mantis shrimp. If you kill a striper, one of the things that I got in the practice of was anytime I'm killing it, I'm cutting its stomach open to see what it's feeding on. It gives me that point of reference. So my next trip out, I know where to go. I know, hey, this is something that I might not have considered before, something I might want to consider now. And that's kind of how I learned that we have these shrimp here all through the fall, all through the spring at those areas.
Yeah, mantis shrimp.
Yeah.
They eat some mantis shrimp. They will eat some mantis shrimp. Talking about on the bottom, right? Pilings. Bucktails, curly tails, bucktails work great. I can't beat like a swim shad type of, swim bait type of thing with a striper. These are always going to kill a striper. Always going to go for this. The open water, over bridge, anywhere, and you can drop these down to the pilings, and that works really well too. So that's always a go-to. Always have one of those in my truck or something, a bag of that.
You don't need gulp for a striper.
Right.
Gulp, this time of year, you're going to have bluefish and you're going to have croaker tear you apart. Striper, they're not as concerned about the scent as they are what that bait looks like.
And
they're very visual.
And how it's moving, yeah. Now on the bridge, the rocks, a whole different technique. It's rock fishing. And the main thing about the stripers and the rocks is people don't cast up in the rocks far enough. You got to really put a bait in the rocks and then crank it out, right? And I'm using the hard baits on when I'm doing stuff like that. You know, these are probably, you know, Missouri type of things. These things are crazy body to them, and they float. So when I do throw them into the rocks, I can see it, right? And then start cranking it out of there. And really like bang it into the rocks. Bang, 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 put it into a little hole in the rocks instead of start cranking out. For some reason, if you put it too far out, they see it land here, they're wanting it coming out of the rocks for something, right? So that's really seems a key on those. You know, smaller ones when they're silver sides, right? Smaller ones like that, when the silver sides out there, that's a really silver side size or Menhaden size. If they're starting to get Menhaden out there, I'll start throwing that stuff.
You pretty much stick with that small bill just to run, you know, 1 or 2 feet underwater.
Yeah, unless that's for when I'm fishing right up at the top of the rocks, and it's real fun because it's real active. You know, you see them sweep at it and miss it and all that stuff. But if I'm like, say on the I'll do this on the outside towards the tubes, right there, Fort Wool, that whole outside. The inside corner, or even on the inside where the two bridges come together, I'll fish that. But also, it's a real deep hole right there. So then I'll go into a rattle trap type of thing. So that sinks down. That's about 20 feet there. I'll let it sink down near the rocks and just start ripping it through there. And I'll just do this, like jigging it like a silver buddy. Is that what they call it in freshwater?
Yeah.
Right. Just because you got the current, you're moving with the current.
Like a blade bait.
Yeah, so I'll do that for them there, and that works real well too. The red and white is a good striper color.
Classic striper color.
Yeah.
For us, if I'm fishing a little bit deeper, normally I'll just keep a floating line. With a floating line, I have right now set up. I have this set up for carp, so I got like 5-foot leader. But generally, I'll want to go a bit longer. I'll want to go like an 8-9 foot leader. With current, a lot of this depends on current, but really floating line, even with weighted flies, I'm fishing the top 5 foot of the water column. You have other fly lines, and this is where I definitely don't have the advantage on a guy like Kev. He can go and simply change his lure, and he can hit any area within that water column. For me, I have to really focus on changing my fly line. So what's kind of standard with fly fishing, weight forward floating, again, generally hitting the top 5 foot of the water column. If I want to go a little bit deeper, I either have to have another spool that I go and take off on the water and restring, or have another fly rod with me that might have something like an intermediate line, which is going to go from like that 5 to 10, 5 to 15 foot range, depending on my fly, depending on my leader length, and depending on the current. If I really want to go somewhere deeper, or you know, from like 10 to bottom, I'm looking at a sinking line, and with that we get into sink rates, the weight, literally the physical weight and grains of the line, and where that taper is. So on this I have some stuff about fly line, about different kind of how the fly line sinks and the different tapers that will kind of help explain that. But again, my setup for fishing deeper water is a different set of line for this.
And one thing that we probably should have said at the beginning, current. Stripers love current. When the current dies, that bite's going to die. You know, you got an hour before something else happens. So it's really about the current when it comes to those. We probably should have hit that right at the beginning. Like when you're seeing sinking stuff, you got to compensate for that. You know, for your sinking line, you got to get up in the head of stuff where you're going to hit, all that stuff.
And don't, you know, be smart with what you're doing out there. Know your own limitations. That's probably the biggest thing when you're dealing with current, and especially at night when you're dealing with line. But don't be afraid of the current either.
Yeah.
Current is your friend for this.
Yes, especially with striper. They love it. They love that buffet coming through.
Another place. Yes, sir.
You're talking about current. So you're constantly drifting. I've been seeing a lot of people lately that anchoring out and then fishing the light lines, whether using a bridge hugger pilot or anchors and all that stuff. Do you recommend one or the other, or you just mainly you're just going with the current?
I like the maneuverability if I'm fishing the light line. I like, if I see a 30-incher and he's moving this way, I'm gonna chase him down until I get him. I'll chase him between 5 sets of pilings, following him through with the light line.
And
so I like being maneuverable through all that stuff.
For a safety aspect, number one,
Dangerous. Most dangerous thing you can do in a kayak is anchor off.
yeah. Number two, especially at night, it doesn't matter how visible you are. The boaters have right of way to us because we're not under power, but we have to assume that that boat is going to do the stupidest thing that is imaginable. So we don't want to be on anchor. We want to be maneuverable. We want to be able, a nice thing about the bridges is if I have a boat coming right at me, all I have to do is cut through a set of pilings. I'm on the other side. If they want to come back at me, they go back. They have to go around those pilings. I can get away. Whereas if I'm anchored up, now I have to worry about getting off anchor quickly, getting that anchor line through, and then getting back away from that boat. So, especially at night, I totally would not recommend it.
Yeah.
That's an awesome question.
One more technique on bridge structure and is the tube. It's a real good technique on the first island on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge tunnel. Not so much at the HRBT because the tube's not really. It's not like a real good spine, right? You got 2 tubes, so it's a little bit up and down. But the spine at the Chesapeake Bay Bridge tunnel is real pronounced, straight up and down, right? And it comes up some spots. About 14 feet is a good spot. If you got current going this way, the striper going to be hanging right here. I learned this in a boat, actually. So the striper going to be hanging right here. You start off here, but you're in deeper water. Only drop your lure down, whatever the height of the top of the tube is, drift over, and bam. Almost, it's real good technique. A lot of boaters use it because it's a lot of motoring. You get in the line, you do the drift over, a little tough in the kayak, but that's a real good technique too. And also the same thing, that's the same idea as any kind of drop-off structure, right? Yeah.
Can I interject something? Just go back a little bit about the current and stuff, especially out there. Just like you're, I'm sure, aware of this. This time of year, you'll get those crazy currents where you can be 3/4 of the way out of the Hampton Va Bridge Tunnel, and you may think you're in 20 feet of water, and you're in 5 feet of water, and you got that shoal out there, and you got a big boat that comes around, and if you're anchored up, or even if you're in that area, you're in a world of hurt out there, because those waves are going to come, and they're going to hit that, and it's just going to be a succession of
Hawaii 5-0 style.
And,
and you're going down.
And especially at the Bay Bridge Tunnel, you also have to think, anyone know what's on the southwest side of the Bay Bridge Tunnel? Prominent landmark, massive employer here.
Oh,
Naval Station Norfolk. And you have aircraft carriers.
HRBT.
Yeah, that's what I meant. there we go. Okay.
I'm like, I know it's not the Navy because it's just a beach.
If you haven't noticed, I'm not the smartest person here. Okay, so you have. Thank
You
you.
got the Navy.
Now I'm completely lost. You have
the fishing pier.
You
man,
have.
fishing piers.
Thanks, Vic. You have literally aircraft carriers. You have submarines. You have all these different vessels that have a lot of draft and a lot of water disbursement going through that area by the first island, going through that channel.
Yeah.
And sometimes, especially with submarines, those subs can be further off. You might not know that they're there, and you might have a rogue wave that comes. Another thing to kind of keep. HRBT is one of those places, it's a very good place to learn, but it's a good place to keep in mind. You have to keep your head on a swivel.
Yeah, that's why I say it's going to make you learn, because there's a lot of challenges there. It's not overwhelming, but it's all tricky and it's chaotic with the noises and the boats, and you do have to be alert at all times out there.
I've only turtled one time, and it wasn't by I'm clumsy. It was. I'd never seen anything like it before. And this is one at HRBT, but this was at Little Creek, and this huge Navy frigate came by, And I was out there with another friend, and he was coming through pretty, you know, I fished there all the time. And he came through so fast, it displaced all the water. I was sitting there fishing in like 8 feet of water, and just like that, there was no water there, and I was being sucked out. And I was like, what the? And it was instantaneous.
Yeah.
And I turned around and looked back, and that water had come back, and it was a huge
White water.
tsunami.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm up on the rocks.
Yeah.
I looked over at my friend because he was further down, and his kayak shot up in the air like a rocket.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah. These Navy ships are big, and they displace a lot of water.
So I've been over there, and sometimes when it's rough, it's just like, you gotta be careful when you're next to those rocks, and it's,
yeah.
Yep.
So
You
know,
definitely-
when he says, you know, keep your head on a swivel, you always got to be aware of, you know, what's not only with boats, but what's going on with the tides, and the wind directions, especially this time of year when you get the real crazy tides. I'm sorry.
So
Oh,
the
yeah,
next
yeah,
plate,
yeah.
we good with the bridge?
What's that?
We good with the bridge?
Yeah. Yeah.
Any questions on the bridge?
On
I
bridge
guess?
structures.
Are you doing the light line thing? Would you do that now?
Yeah. Yeah. It's whenever the water. This is the time of year that's good. It used to be all year long, but this is a good time of year in the fall's time of year when the water gets in that cool 60-degree range. That's really good for them. They'll be there in the summer too, but you won't see them as much. Yeah, right now is a good time of year for them.
For kayak species, one of the great things to kind of let you know, hey, this is probably a good time to go target them. These red cards. With what we're going to get, a sea bass, totally different story. These right here are going to help give you that idea of this is a good time. With the beginning of this trophy striper season, like Mr. Cagle said, they would not open this up right now if there weren't fish there to be caught. So, kind of give you an idea with that.
Yep.
My
This thing.
docks.
Docks. Yeah, I was going to say.
So-
Okay, well now we're into the creeks, into
So-
the backwaters.
As a fly fisherman, we don't have the light line fishery as predominantly as we had even 4 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
So one of the things I love to do is I love to go fly fish docks. And doing that, lighted docks are the bees. For any of you that fish Rudy has some amazing green lights on their docks that hold a lot of really good fish right now. What I'm doing when I'm going to those docks is I'm utilizing Kev's light line principle. I don't want to go up there. I don't want to get right in the lights. I want to stay back a little ways. I want to be in the shadows. I want those fish to focus on the bait that is in those lights. A lot of times I'll take a look at that in these back creeks and these inlets. You can get a really, really good idea on what they're biting on.
Yeah.
And that will help me decide what I want to throw at them. With the lights, I like going back, so under the docks, I like trying to get under the docks and bringing them back out. And I like basically fan casting, but having a method to it. I like hitting the edges, and then I'll start looking at going to the middle. But I want to bring my bait out from that shadow into that light, and a lot of it's current dependent. And I want them to really be able to ambush what I'm throwing at them. And I want to give them time to see that bait. I don't want to be ripping that bait past them. I want them to know what's there, and it's something for them to eat, and they need to eat it now. The cast I'll use, for a lack of a better term right now, we'll call it a standard cast. I'll go do my river runs through it type of standard cast, where, one second here. Where I'm going back and I'm going forth. I'm letting the line load the rod in my arm move. Another thing I'll do is what's called the bow and arrow cast, where I'll have enough line, I'll have fly line out in my lap ready to shoot out, but I'll have it in my finger. And I'll pull that back like a bow and arrow. And I don't want it too far. I have to get that line out. And generally I'm going to use a shorter leader to do this. And you can skip it under those docks. I mean, you're not going to be doing that bow and arrow type cast from me to Officer Cagle back there. But
a quick shot.
from me to the second row of seats, that's something that I can do. I can make that little presentation to get under there so I can bring that bait back out.
Yeah, I've even used that one too. Even with the bait caster, it's a little bit tougher because you gotta like a lot of thumb control, but it's almost like just whipping it in there, just whipping it in. Same thing at nighttime on the docks. I use the same lure. I'll use that one because it's dark. In the daytime, I'll use like the swim style bait or a jig head with a gulp. Usually that's more in the summertime stuff, but I like a paddle tail. I like that vibration of a paddle tail. Also, redfish magics. I can't catch reds off of them, but I can catch a lot of stripers off of them. So those things are like my striper baits.
What do you call them, Kevin? Little spinny.
Little spinnies.
And another thing, talking about
Spinny D's.
daytime now, is at night, in a place like Rudy Inlet, you got people out there, people are going to want to get those stripers, everyone's going to be hitting those lighted docks. Still a good place to go, but as long as you have current, as long as you have something there to help congregate that bait and those fish can ambush, do not overlook those unlighted docks.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of
structure.
people, I'll go out there and I'll see people just fishing lights. And okay, I want to go get my fish, I'm going to back off the lights and I'm going to go fish those other places. Because those fish in the lights might have been pounded. They might have seen the same thing or something similar 50, 60 times in a night. And they're just, we can change the behavior of those fish and their attitude to feed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go somewhere where we haven't done that.
And even if there's not a light on the dock, even if there's ambient light, that's enough light at nighttime for a striper. And stripers aren't like in the lights, like you were saying. They're on the outskirts of light. You got a light. It's so much different of a light that's on a dock because it's it disperses around rather than having that sharp edge like on the bridge. So you're really going to see these fish out here more in the shadows, not right under the light. The bait's going to be under here so they can see it, and then as it comes out here, bam, then they'll hit it. So also with like positioning, you don't want to be like on that spot either. So you kind of have to back off a dock and really fan cast the whole area. And like you said, I do the same thing. I'd rather come across the current a lot of times, and then if that's not going to work, then I'll come with the current. Now, I'm usually not up a current. That's usually not the best thing because it just comes up behind it because it spooks a lot of fish more than anything. But same thing. Yeah. And so we're in the creeks. You got the docks, drop-offs. You got jetties. You
have holes. Basically anything that they can get a little bit out of the current. And even, striper are a lot like specks. If there's a depression that is something as simple as that, and even if that half that fish is back or half that fish is out of the current and half of it's in the current, they're going to go to those places. Because again, it's less work that they have to focus on, and they can go and help ambush, get those fish quickly.
Yeah.
So when I'm fishing places like that, again, the line that I'm using when I'm fly fishing is really going to depend on the depth. That's going to help determine if I want to go through an intermediate, a sinking. Like I said, 98% of my time, saltwater, I'm throwing a floating line. And with flies, we talked about like the clouser and the bend back and the shrimp patterns, the ultras, the crazy charlies. When it gets a little bit later in the spring and the summer, we have the mullet that start coming in. And for striper, I'll start throwing bigger flies. I'll start throwing the mullet and the bunker. So like EP bait fishes, articulated flies with a bigger profile, so I can match that hatch. Right now, we don't have the water temps at this moment. We still have the smaller stuff, the silver sides. For me, striper, probably my favorite bait. Inshore, for everything, especially striper, is still going to be a shrimp pattern type. Fly and throwing artificials on conventional gear, I love a shrimp for that all throughout the year. Everything loves shrimp.
Yep. All right, next.
I got a question
question.
on the fly rod setup. You have this in your presentation a little bit, but so for how much do you lose, or how much of a difference if you just say like had a 7 or 8 foot fluoro leader, just regular line? I mean, do you really lose very much as opposed to going to specific, you know, what's made for? And what do you, is that something you do like 30 pound, like Kevin uses?
Okay, great question. Number one, with fly fishing, you have all these things. You have different types of leaders. You have furled leaders. You have tapered leaders. Basically, when we're talking about loading the rod, we have these different types of leaders. Generally a taper. And what that taper does is the heavier the line, the more quickly it's going to slow down. The lighter the line, it's going to slow down after the heavier does. So what it does is it helps turn the fly over. So you get a presentation. If you have like a straight leader, you're not always going to get that fly to turn over the way you want. And then you have to worry about the bend of the hook going and hitting the fly, or hitting the leader, hitting the line. Or sometimes if you're making a longer cast, you're losing that power. It will just kind of fizzle out, and you can watch your leader just do a little squiggly in the water, and the fly just drop right there on the spot. So my leaders will really depend on what type of fly I'm throwing, and not only that, but conditions I'm throwing it in. A lot of times for striper fishing like docks, I'll just go with like a straight 20-pound fluorocarbon leader, you know, 5 to, or not a 5, like a 6 to 8, 6 to 9 foot range. I'm not necessarily concerned about the length. I might just keep trying cutting off flies, retying, because I'm not too concerned. That fly is not losing momentum, so it's gonna turn over on me. But once that wind starts picking up and I might be casting into the wind without that tapered leader, that's when my fly, even on shorter casts, is just gonna fizzle out and drop. So I want that tapered leader. I want any advantage I can to keep the speed of the fly going forward so I can get a nice natural presentation. As far as weights are concerned, I'm really, it depends on, number one, the size of the fly I'm using. I have, this is kind of set up for carp. I'm catching, you know, 5 to 15 pound carp right now. And that's my drag. So I can get away with using a light, leader, because while I'm still putting pressure on that fish, it's still got enough room to move that I'm not having to worry about a 5-pound fish breaking a 10-pound leader. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm using a bigger fly, something with more weight, obviously I'm going to want to step up my leader. And if I'm not going after, you know, sub slot or lower slot fish, I want to go after the larger slot or the over slot fish. Obviously with that too, I'm going to want to use a heavier leader. A lot of that, I can really horse those fish. I can put more drag on them. And especially if I want to release those fish, I want to get those fish in as quickly as I can so I can get them in, get them back in the water, let them recover so they can swim off, and I don't have to worry about mortality. Got you? Yes, sir.
Any questions?
Yeah, when you're using a sinking line, I don't know much about fly fishing. I've only fished floating line like in ponds. but it would seem like that sinking line would drag when you go to cast.
You get a lot of drag.
How do you get it up on top, or is there a technique you use to get it out of the water to reduce that drag?
It depends on what I'm fishing for. Really, most of the time I'm using a sinking line is up on the James River or any of these tidal rivers for shad. And at that time, I'm still kind of targeting striper. I'll tend to go and bring more of my line in. So as I lift the rod tip up, I can bring that line higher up in the water column. And then that's where I'm making my cast to load the rod and get that line back out. Another thing I'll do is if I'm not concerned with spooking a fish, this is me being lazy, I'll do kind of, in fly fishing you have what's called spay casting. And the point of spay casting is you're using the rod tip and you're using movement to get that line up on the surface of the water and using that tension to load the rod. I'll just do a bastardized spay cast, and I'll lift it up, get that line up toward the top of the water, and I have less effort to get it up. I mentioned this in here for kayak fly fishing. I like a longer rod. Number one, it's just a tip doogie. I like a longer rod because I can get that line up further. I don't have to strip as much line in. Number two, when I'm doing my cast, if I'm sitting down or even elevated, the longer rod I'm doing is keeping the line higher off the water. A lot of times when you're kayaking and you're trying to make those longer casts and you're sitting down, when you go back, if your timing's not right, that line's going to go back there, and while you're trying to load it, it's going to hit the water. Once it hits the water, you've lost all momentum that you've built. And you try and go forward, now you have the weight of the fly line that you're trying to pull off, breaking that surface tension, and your forward cast is going nowhere. So I like using a longer line, or longer fly rod, and really when you're fly casting from a kayak, the higher you can elevate yourself, the less fatigue you're going to build, and the better your technique and the more accurate and precise presentations you'll make.
Who asked about sinking lines? Was it you? One thing I'd recommend doing if all you use is floating lines a lot is at Bass Pro you can get sink tip kits. They have. I've got one that has two different weight tips that you can put on, and you can either use one or the other or both combined. And that's a good way to learn how to use sinking lines. It actually it's a loop-to-loop connection, and you learn how to throw that out, and you can feel the difference as it's sinking. And you kind of get the feel. I do that for crappie fishing sometimes in the freshwater as well. But you kind of learn how to feel that, getting that up and getting it out of the water. Once it's up out of the water, it's the same as casting a regular floating line. It's just a little heavier, so it's going to change the way your rod loads.
It adds basically, depending on the weight of the sink tip, it's going to add another line weight to your rod. So you can overload, you can underload. Faster action rods, meaning you have less bend in them. Like Kevin was talking about his rods, those faster action, you can get away with overloading it a little bit more than you can a slower action rod. A slower action rod, you can actually underweight the rod a little bit more. One of the things that you can do, if you look on Sierra Trading Post, it's a great online site. You can get different things. You can get different types of sinking lines. You can get shooting heads for spay casting at a fraction of the price that you go to Bass Pro or Green Top for. You can build your own sink tip kits, and basically you can go take a real fine, real small heat shrink, and you can take floating non-tapered or sinking non-tapered line, and you can do your own loop-to-loop connector on that using that shrink wrap, and you can do different lengths on that. So there's options that you have. instead of going out there. My sinking lines, Ben over here, he gave me one probably $30, $40 sinking line, and I think I bought another one that was like $20 at Bass Pro. When it comes to line, in fly fishing, line quality makes a huge difference. The line that I have on this rod right now, this floating line, is like $80 line. Sinking line, honestly, because I use it so little and it doesn't have the purpose, or it doesn't have the utility that my floating line has, I just go with some of the cheapest stuff I can find. Casting sinking line, honestly, is one of my least favorite things to do. It's like trying to cast a piece of 6-pound monofilament with a stakeout pole. It sucks. So don't really focus. A lot of things you can do in a lot of these striper areas are not deep. You don't have to go and worry about fishing anything. You can catch striper this time of year. I don't go over 10 foot, or I don't go deeper than 10 foot. I don't need to. There are so many areas where I might only be fishing 3 or 4 foot and catching these stripers. So don't get really hung up on that.
There might even be times where you're out in 30 foot of water and they're blowing up on top, you know, and that's, you know, in open water we used to have that, not so much anymore, but in the fall we'd have these explosions of schoolie stripers out at Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. We're coming back from tog fishing, and the evenings would have these just crazy blitzes out there. It's not so much anymore, but that's another fly line.
Yeah.
You can just throw anything in there and it's on, you know. Yeah, so that's one of those things that you wouldn't need a sinking line for.
Yeah.
Just keep it on top.
I think the only other thing as far as locations I have, again, we
I got
briefly
one.
hit on this, channel edges, anything where you have a current break. You have those drop-offs, you have those holes.
Another whole place. There's a whole nother spot.
Oh yeah, there is one other spot I want to talk about.
What was that?
Flats and grass flats.
That's where I was going. Yeah, that's where I was going. Grass flats and grassy areas. Not so much down here, the south side, but as you go from Burcosan, Mob Jack Bay up, it's like Florida in the Chesapeake Bay. I mean, you've got grass flats that look like southern Florida. It's amazing. And it's a striper nursery up there. We're talking these 12 to 15 inch, 16 inch stripers. This is where they hang out all summer long. Deep summertime. I go camping out and you look at a 4 Day on the Bay video. That's in the middle of August in the Pocomoke Sound up near Maryland, up in near Crisfield. And that was stripers all day long with spinny dinghies.
A lot of that, once you get up there, the bait that they're hitting are more of the smaller silver sides.
Yes. And again, and that would be, I'm using weedless because it's grass up there. Weedless hooks, weighted weedless hooks with a spinny and this type of thing and that type of thing, right? Just you kind of, you're standout and you're kind of blending in baits.
Look at the potholes when you're out there. You'll see a big grass flat, then a depression, either no grass or lower levels, less grass in those areas.
Sand holes and then the edges of those.
And like the same principle with the light at night, they're sitting back there in that grass on those edges waiting to ambush prey coming out. So hit those edges before you go and blow anything else up.
And you'd be surprised how thick of grass they'll be hanging in. You know, I was actually on that video, I was filming underwater, my lure going underwater through the grass, and a striper comes zooming by. And I didn't get it on film, but it was like, this was so thick, I didn't think it was right here, and he just came right by. And that's a really cool thing to do. And it's also visual. I was doing the clear water, you could see the grass is casting out, letting it, watching it over top of the grass, letting it drop in the hole, and then bringing it out of a hole, dropping it back in. It was cool to watch. And but that's a really cool fishery. Not so much like I said down here, but as you go up in the bay, it's a lot of that up there.
And late spring, summer time frame, for catch and release striper fishing, that's where you're going to want to start looking at. Middle bay, up northern bay, the water temps are going to get colder. It's going to get cleaner. They're going to have more places to go. Striper haven.
Yeah. Yep. Any questions?
Yeah, so maybe not actually when you're in the grass or when you just cleared the grass, do you like to bounce it along the bottom back to you?
Well,
or?
not really, because if it's too much small of a hole, I'm just gonna dig through grass on the way out of it.
Right.
So I just let it just drop down, where it's just trying to look like a fish that's just kind of swimming around and going through. Now, if it does hit the grass, I'll just rip it out. Learned this from Drew Camp. I mean, it's got me some fish when I was in Louisiana, hitting grass and ripping it through grass. That works really well because it's a real fast action, and it looks like something's trying to escape something else, and then something else can get on hold of it. It's a good technique.
And when you're fishing that grass, don't get too hung up if you have stuff hanging off that lure, because again, Drew, one of the smartest fishing minds I've ever met, and dude's like only 18 years old. But think about those bait fish are going, they have those fins, they can't clear off all the algae, all the moss, all the grass. So as they're coming out of those areas, they might have that on as a fish ambushes and attacks. So you feel bass fishing for me, spinner baits. I'd feel the slightest little bit of vegetation on my spinner bait, and I'd be like, "Oh, screw this! This is done. I'm done." Clear it off. Try and go back. Wouldn't catch the fish. Once I started, okay, I got a little bit. Okay, I'll clear this off when I come back in. That's when I started catching more bass. Don't let that be a deterrent to stop you from finishing out your presentation.
And also what I do is if I feel that the weight's on it with a little bit of grass, I'll just rip it right there and just try to bounce it off. And sometimes it'll fall off, and sometimes that'll attract, it's another erratic presentation in the middle of a steady swim. All of a sudden, and then you start swimming again. That looks pretty good for them. Yep. Any questions? We'll wrap this up.
All right, I got a question then.
All righty.
All right, has nothing to do with striper fishing.
There we go.
So a 3-part question for you.
In 10 sections.
Yes, you will. Only if you ask, right?
First question, part A. So who came up with HRBT Bandit? Was that you, or was that Rick?
That was me.
Okay.
That was before I met Rick.
And when did you transition from the HRBT Bandit to Kayak Kevin?
When I started going on Captain Reese's show.
Okay. And which do you prefer? Did you prefer when you were the HRBT Bandit, or when you're now transformed into Kayak Kevin?
HRBT Bandit was a little well known, so that was it was a
But you had a
small
hat and
time.
everything.
Yeah, I had everything made up, man.
Yeah,
Had a
what
hat and
happened to that
everything
hat?
made up.
You still got that hat?
I think I do.
Okay.
Still have that
That's
boat.
all right.
Little 10-foot boat I was riding out there. And that's a great spot for small boats. Start on maneuverability.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I learned HRBT on a 16-foot boat, and then went to a 10-foot boat, and I was like, whoa! It was trick boat. All righty.
Thank you.
Where would you launch a kayak to go off HRBT?
Willoughby Ramp.
Fort Monroe.
I live.
Depending on which side.
Yeah.
Or like Doogie said, Fort Monroe. Fort Monroe, if you have like a northeast wind and you don't feel comfortable going to Willoughby, you have that windbreak with the shore right there.
You
don't
got
have
no
the veg.
paddle either.
Yeah.
Keep in mind the Fort Monroe ramp, they do want $2 from you. It's a drop. Like during the daytime, they ask that you pay inside, and in the nighttime, it's an honor system on there. But
Now, Mr.
Actually,
Beck,
are
I
they
can
still
tell
doing
you.
that? Because the last time I was out
Yeah,
there,
they
they
are.
said that for kayaks didn't have to pay if you didn't have a trailer.
no, it's
If you had a
it was-
trailer, you had to.
It was $5 for boats and $2 for kayaks.
I can
Last
tell
I
you
checked.
right now for you, worked around the 95 bridge on the James, and there are still a ton of stripers, and inshore type area, that is one of your best areas for the next couple of days, at least, to get into one of those nicer sized
And the
stripers.
stripers are coming out of their spawn now. So this is when they're lean, hungry, and aggressive. This is a good time for them. That's why the season's coming in,
Well,
because
that's the thing, we were out, Rob and I were out, I guess, last week, and a couple weeks before that. But just small spoons, shad darts. I I've got this little ultralight setup, and I got an 18-inch striper on that thing, which was just heaven in every possible way. It was just, you know, getting anyway, fish flying everywhere, big fish were spawning, and
Yeah.
it was a little beyond R-rated, but it was fun. Don't read too much into that, I'm just saying.
If you fish the 95 bridge up there, you put in at 14th Street or at Ancaros?
I put in it at Ancaros. I won't fish James River again until the early part of the shad run next year, at least below the fall line. I get to Ancaros early, and I make sure that my immunizations are up to date. You can catch hypodermic needles, maxi pads, or the famous James River whitefish. So, yeah.
I actually prefer 14th Street. It depends on what kind of boat you're using and if you can carry it down, but it's a lot nicer launching up there.
Real steep embankment.
Yeah, you're going up and downstairs, and it's a whole different world. All right, I think they're going to be hanging around a while, so if you got other questions, you can probably come hit them afterward. We got a few more things I want to talk about, but William, Kevin, thank you very much.
Here we go. I mean, I got nothing. You guys.